55% of the free float of a multi-billion-dollar company was owned by really obsessed idiots from the internet. The company was not doing fantastic, 6 CEOs in like 7 years. Hedge funds were all looking around at the retail sector being like, well, these are going to be decimated. And so they started to take up heavy short positions against companies like GameStop. People on Reddit were noticing that the bets taken against it vastly exceeded the amount of shares that should actually be in circulation. Boredom from COVID, you're a bit angry at the system because you've been locked up for a year. All of a sudden, all you have to do is buy a few shares of this one fun stock. You could bankrupt some hedge funds. Like, come on, let's go. They started to just spam, I'm buying ass, I'm buying cum. The share price topped out at...
Incredible.
Yeah.
That is a gaping hole in institutional regulation. If there's anything that's more crooked than the US media, I'd be surprised.
GameStop shares. On the stock market, you can buy shares in a company, and the price can go up or down.
A wild ride of a story that began with just some memes.
This is Josh Hamilton. He's a podcaster, a researcher, and he's also an author who's about to launch his second book called To the Moon. It's all about the GameStop saga, and today we've got the opportunity to dive right into that, to find out how the general public, Reddit users and alike, managed to crash hedge funds who had shorted the stock of a public company, GameStop. It's really, really interesting to see just exactly how they exploited a regulatory loophole in which they managed to crash the performance of people which were looking to benefit from the demise of GameStop's performance. Please join us in this fascinating conversation. Josh, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I've spotted the 4 Hour Workweek up there. I love that book. Tim Ferriss.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, Tim Ferriss, absolutely. Yeah, good. You're avid reader?
Yeah, love to read. I have to do a lot for my podcast, so like if I want to interview people, then normally they want you to have read their book, because that's the best time that you're going to get to interview a lot of sort of bigger media personalities or authors.
And so you just tell me that you've done 382 podcasts.
Yeah.
How long has it taken you to rack up that number?
Oh, it's got to be like 7 years now. So I didn't do them all like one a week for 7 years. Right. So I used to run an après ski bar in Austria.
Cool.
So I used to do 5 months of that, and then have 7 months off. So then I'd make the podcast, and like I wrote a book. And then, so yeah, I had 7 months to do whatever I want.
And where were you publishing?
So the podcast, so
yes.
They're on YouTube. Then I started just audio only, and then sort of realized around COVID times that video was just far better. Like, I had no video production experience to begin with. Yep. So I was like, do you know what? I'll just stick to audio. It's less complicated. And yeah, the podcast landscape was very different back then. So there was a lot more just audio only stuff. Not that isn't still about, but I think people want video now. So yeah, we're on all platforms.
And what's your most viewed video? What level of engagement have you had?
The top viewed interview, just the one long form video, has I think 144,000 plays.
Amazing.
Yeah. So that was about GameStop, which then became the topic of the book I'm currently writing.
Ah, really? That's interesting. Cool. What was the narrative of the podcast on that?
That specific podcast was talking. It was just, I think, 2 months after the whole thing had kicked off. So it must have been March 2021.
Yep.
And we were talking about what happens if the short interest on the company exceeds 100%, and he was walking me through a bunch of theories he had about what then happens if the short squeeze began to like cascade. So that if you had, say, if you've got more than 100% of the shares short that are in circulation, it means that there's more shares in circulation than should possibly exist.
Yes.
So people were speculating as to how many shares of the company could idiots from the internet purchase, then refuse to sell, and then theoretically, because of supply and demand, push the price up to get all of the short hedge funds sort of margin called one after the other. And if people had refused to sell, what the cap on what the price could be, because through naked short selling and sort of more legal share rehypothecation, you could end up with a situation where the actual number of shares like exceeded the float like 4, 5, 6, 7 times over theoretically. So we were just like wildly speculating on what could happen, and people seem to love it.
As from anyone that hasn't or isn't aware, just to explain high level what GameStop What happened?
So basically, the company was not doing fantastic for a couple of years. They went through, I think, 6 CEOs in like 7 years. And then COVID came around. A bunch of big hedge funds were all looking around at the retail sector being like, well, these are going to be decimated by all the lockdowns and the tumultuous nature, supply chain breakdown, and just the chaos that was unfolding. And so they started to like take up heavy short positions against companies like GameStop. And for some reason, they were really focused in on it. And I think it's because a couple of the hedge funds that had been short the company over the past 6-7 years had consistently made massive profits off the company on its slow decline. So they were just constantly taking up short positions. Anyway, it got to a point in January 2021 where the share price had just sort of ticked up to around $10, which was twice as much as it had been over the past year or two. And suddenly people on Reddit were noticing that the short interest, so the bets taken against it, had vastly exceeded the amount of shares that should actually be in circulation. So it was up at, I think one of the official figures was like 150, 160, 170% short. So what happens when you do a short sale is essentially you, in theory, if you're a hedge fund, say you're like, right, okay, Sainsbury's is going, they're going down the toilet. I'm going to sell them short. You call up someone who is holding the shares, like a pension fund or a mutual fund or someone like that. And you go, okay, I would like to borrow 10,000 shares of Sainsbury's. And they'll go, okay, great. You can have them for a small fee, which never gets passed on to the people who hold the pensions, just to the pension fund, which people felt was a bit unfair, but that's a different discussion. So then they will immediately go out into the market, sell the 10,000 shares, say for £1 million, and then they'll wait. And if the shares become less valuable than when they first took up their position, say the total is now worth $500,000, they will immediately buy back the shares in the market, keep the $500,000, return the shares to the person they borrowed it from, and then there's your profit.
Right.
What happens in practice is, in the legal way, they can call up the mutual fund and be like, do you have the shares? And then, especially if they're a market maker, they can just print the shares to sell short without actually ever having to go and get them. So it means that one pension fund or brokerage that's holding the shares could have promised those shares to 4 or 5 different brokers. And then once they have been, say you get the ones that have just been made up and sold out to someone, they could then be held by another pension fund who could then lend those now fake shares out to someone. But there's no way to tell what the real shares and what the fake shares are.
Yes.
And a lot of this is all done in the name of liquidity. So I think one of the things I've discovered while writing this book and interviewing loads of people on the podcast for it is that liquidity is like the ultimate goal of the US financial system. Is like, if you could, like, you want to be able to sell things as fast as possible and turn them into money.
Yep.
And I feel like what this kind of uncovered a little bit is that there isn't the real price discovery that you would expect in a a healthy and functioning market. Because if market makers who are just legally able to create shares in order to sell in the name of liquidity, they have to all balance it out eventually. But if they don't, then there's this thing called a fail to deliver, and they can just fail to deliver on their obligations, which means that you can have these monstrous short positions taken up. Even if they fail to eventually close them, they can just continually roll them over forever. And what happened with GameStop was a bunch of people on the internet had spotted this situation and just started buying as much as they possibly could. And as the internet took over and boredom from COVID, and it's a great ride for people to get along when you're bored and you're a bit angry at the system because you've been locked up for a year, and all the big businesses seem to be fine, and all of a sudden, all you have to do is buy a few shares of this one fund stock, and you could bankrupt some hedge funds. Like, come on, let's go! And people just started jumping on the bandwagon. The share price topped out at $480 per share on, I believe it was the 28th of January 2021.
Yep.
And from there, that just that little bit of madness was the story being told by, there's been a couple of books written about it. There's been the film, Dumb Money, a couple of different documentaries, and they all looked at that thing and went, wow, that was crazy. And yeah, that was insane. But for me, what was really crazy is what's happened since. So since then, the company has gone from being in the doldrums, not looking great on paper fundamentally. They've used this constant fluctuation that seems to now happen within the share price, because there wasn't just the one run up like the story says. It went back down, and then it bounced all the way back up to about 280, then back down to 50, then a couple months later tracked all the way back up to 350. Like, there's been loads of unbelievably, like, seemingly pendulum not caused swings by anything, like not on like fundamentals or big announcements or moves in the market, and people just go, well, it's because the shorts never covered. And so after that, people were constantly looking around frantically for, well, how can we prove it? So they started this thing called DRS. So it's there's a direct registration system. So another thing that people uncovered whilst, you know, everyone was becoming obsessed with this story, like tens of thousands of people, was that most of the shares that are in circulation are IOUs held by one company, Seed & Co, in the DTCC, like the people who hold all of the shares and oversee all of the markets, which is a private corporation, not a government regulated body.
Right.
They self-regulated. So they hold all the shares, but you can take your shares out of the system to stop brokers or pension funds being able to lend them out in order for the stock to just, you know, be continually shorted down. So they started registering themselves as being the direct owners, so theoretically take them out of circulation. So at the time of speaking, I think the most they ever got to so far was about 55% of the free float of a multi-billion-dollar company was owned by really obsessed idiots from the internet who jumped on this bandwagon for memes and to bankrupt a hedge fund. Yeah. So there, you know, there's other things, but that's how I started like getting really involved in that story, and that really helped like grow my podcast a lot. It really blew it up because people were really interested in this story, and seemingly I was one of the few people who were willing to interview serious people about it
and delved into it. It's amazing, isn't it, when there can be such a kind of traditional and legacy operating system which is so flawed.
Yeah, and that's something that sort of came up through the saga, that the company had took a bit of money that they'd raised using the massive fluctuations in price. They're now sitting on $4.5 billion plus 1.3 billion, I believe it is, in convertible notes, like Michael Saylor Bitcoin strategy,
right?
That's now been approved as an investing strategy by the board, so that the CEO and chairman, Ryan Cohen, who takes no salary for his position, he's been given full, basically full reign to go and invest all of that money how he sees fit. So people are speculating that they're going to start doing Michael Saylor style Bitcoin purchases. I think they've already started, seemingly, but they've made the announcement, so they're going to be doing it. It's been a wild ride of a story that began with just some memes and
incredible.
Yeah.
What you don't realize is that, you know, that is a gaping hole in institutional regulation and business structuring. That's the incredible part of it. It's like all of a sudden someone finding a loophole in the UK mortgage facilities, and you can do something to fuck the lender over. Or do you know what I mean? Or
yeah,
it's that gapingly wide, isn't it? It was just so, and that was what was absolutely fascinating about it. And the second part is this kind of crowdsourcing, the power of social. It was just incredible to see how people, and it was like probably, I don't know, would you say it's the most visible kind of demonstration of the power of social that you've seen? The most tangible?
Ooh. Yeah, possibly. I mean, it's the one with the most demonstrable, like, monetary effects, I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, they bankrupted at least one hedge fund. Like, Melvin Capital had to shut down because of the losses they took on that eventually. It ruined the guy's reputation, Gabriel Plotkin. He was for like a decade, he was touted as like the best trader on Wall Street and like this young protege. And this one position came along and he got trashed for it. Then the internet went after him after he was
Does it really expose him, or does it expose the system, do you think?
I think it exposed the amount of people who have no idea what the rest of the world thinks. Like there's definitely a class of people within finance who don't have a whole lot of contact with, the plebs, the rest of us. And I think it kind of exposed them to that a bit. I think it also exposed Wall Street to the idea that could be manipulated for their own gain. So some of the stuff that then started to pop up was, am I allowed to swear on this?
Do whatever you
okay,
want,
sweet. So before I start telling you some of the stuff that was being said, so the people started to suspect like really early on. So it all kicked off on the subreddit Wall Street Bets. Like the group of people looking at GameStop then later like migrated through a bunch of other different subreddits that they would have specifically about this.
Yep.
But especially on the beginning on Wall Street Bets, people were suspecting that the discourse was being manipulated, or that big hedge funds were tracking mentions of different stocks on Wall Street Bets or on social media generally, and trying to use that as intelligence with which they could trade. And so people were then suspecting that there was bots or like postings or posters, paid posters being used to, try and subtly manipulate the discourse online. And they started to just spam 3-letter combinations of words like stock tickers. So they could measure if it was saying GME, 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 GME. And then they started to just spam stuff like I'm buying ass, or I'm buying cum, or like stuff like that. And then that would be then popping up in posts that looked like they were being written by bots. So people were convinced that they were not only monitoring the subreddits, but that they were actively trying to influence them. And I'm kind of convinced that they were at least looking at it. And I would not be surprised if big money was attempting to put, like, as soon as you realize that maybe you could get like a pump on a stock if you get it mentioned on the right thread on Reddit, I guarantee they were at least trying it.
Yes,
like experiments, just throw a couple of stones in the water, see what ripples out.
Yes,
that sort of thing.
Yeah, they're just always looking for angles.
Yeah. And the one other interesting one that happened was people were talking a lot at one point about a thing called the short sale rule, and abbreviated to SSR.
Right.
And then there was a lot of random posts happening and comments where people were pointing out that they were pushing a ticker SSR, which was some defunct Australian mining company.
Right.
And they were taking that to be proof that the bots were reading their comments, then misunderstanding what SSR was meaning. They were just tracking the mentions of 3-letter tickers, and then were pushing that after seeing that it was being mentioned by a lot of people. So yeah, there's a lot of really questionable
tactics that are going on. Yeah. It's interesting you said something earlier though, which is about that trader, which is around like, is it him, or is it the institution? Is it the industry? And I just wonder. I think that we've seen it with that like Oxycontin. The whole the whole painkiller thing in the US, where how many people were selling that, making money from it, and really kind of didn't really know what they were doing, and how many did know. Does that make sense? And I wonder how much of that is in today, how much of that with AI and the way that things are, will we examine the past and shine a light over what you and I look at and go, it doesn't seem right, but fine. But then people we might not have looked at the short market. You go, well, shorting, that doesn't seem very good or very fair, but okay. But then you shine a light over it, and all of a sudden you go, well, actually, you think about the people which are in those roles, and then that unlike you and I, well, maybe you're in it far more heavily, but me, I'd look at it and go, oh yeah, doesn't seem right, but okay. you start to examine it, you see the consequences, the impact that it's having, and the people that are being affected. And then you start to go, and then you shine a light on the people in the industry, and you go, well, how many of these people really are going to work doing this, thinking that they're adding any value to the world other than to line the pockets of. And I wonder also whether that same light gets shone in the medical industry, in the pharmaceuticals space over the next 10 years, as we find today, you know, like Ricky Gervais says, you know, he had no idea 10 years ago that it was that he would be frowned upon for saying that woman can't have a penis, right? 10 years later, you know, it's like, whoa, you can't say that, right? And I just wonder whether that same light, now with AI as well, will shine this light that you and I as general public, the plebs, can't see into these industries, but then we can through that. And then will we be looking at all sorts of genres of people in different industries where you go, hold on, you must have known, if you could see those consequences, that what you were doing wasn't having a complete net negative impact on the world. Might have been paying your salary or paying your bonus, or you might be making a few quid for your climbing the corporate ladder. I just wonder how many of how many more of those industries and jobs and roles will be exposed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on a couple of factors. It depends on how widespread high functioning LLMs continue to be, or how accessible they are to a wider group of people who would be willing to take on because you still need to prompt it right, and you still need people to know what they're looking for until you're at like you never know how fast we're going to get there, but until you're at a much higher level of like agent autonomy for AI, I don't think you get that quite yet. But I think it depends on how widespread open source LLMs are, and if not, who's currently sitting on top of the most powerful bits of analytical AI software. Like the question will be, will people look? Because all that info is there. You know, a lot of people suggest that part of the reason that opioid epidemic was allowed to happen in America was because of the press. Because 80%, I think it is now, of television news, 80% of their profit is coming from pharmaceutical ads. So like, would they be unwilling to comment, or will, you know, LLMs be unwilling to expose things that might have detrimental effects on the ultimate shareholders of
those businesses? Yeah. I mean, look, fundamentally, I think if there's anything that's more crooked than the US media outlets, I'd be surprised. Ooh. Don't you think?
Well, I'd say there's probably a lot of medias out there that are just as corrupt. But in the developed world, the US is pretty bad.
yes. Yeah, it's out there. Yeah. How would you assess the UK's media?
It's 5 years behind America. I think we're about to see. So I think you've seen, and America benefits from the sheer size and the number of different sort of outlets you're able to have because of just eyeballs. But I think the UK media is about to undergo the same transition that the US has been through, where independent media is leading a lot of the stories now.
Right.
Like I think it was about a month ago, there was a lot of controversy coming from the Douglas Murray, Dave Smith, I wouldn't say debate, discussion about the Israel-Palestine conflict on Rogan. Mm-hmm. And that discussion became the lead stories on CNN, on MSNBC, and that happens increasingly so. Yeah. And I think we're going to see the same thing in the UK, where independent media brands are going to become more of a driving force for the stories that are being covered. I mean, and maybe not quite as independent, just the way the media landscape is set up, but you're seeing insurgents already. Like GB News, it's not an independent media brand, but they're trying to come in and disrupt the very, what had been the very stable sort of media environment in Britain. We had the dailies, the tabloids, then there was BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, Sky. Do you know what I mean? And that was the media environment, and now it's so different in that I think GB News are I think they're beating Sky and BBC quite consistently now on viewing figures.
Wow. And
Novara Media, the commies, they are doing a fantastic job, I think. Your guy who runs it, Aaron Bastani, I'm convinced he's no longer the Marxist he once was, because he comes out with the most sensible, reasonable takes about every issue. I just sit and look at his Twitter feed and I'm like, you're way too reasonable to be a Marxist anymore. But he's got really got his head screwed on.
That Aaron Astani, I recognise that name. Someone was recommended that I speak to him about 12 months ago. He's really taken off.
Yeah, and Navarra's been like a slow build. They've been doing it for a long time.
Yes.
And he's got his podcast, which does fantastically well. Their YouTube live shows I think it's 3-4 times a week they've got them brilliant. On, and they're doing fantastic, tens of thousands of
this feels
people.
Like that just feels like a much more real connection with what's going on in the world, doesn't it? You're kind of, and I think the other thing is that because of the low barriers to entry to it, what you're able to do is you're able to find views and perspectives of people which resonate with you. It's the diversity of that which the choice of podcasts and these platforms offer, isn't it? Whereas you're kind of limited to, like you say, such a narrow selection.
Yeah, but even then, it's the format and if you go on BBC News to have a discussion about a topic, maybe you get 10 minutes.
Yes, max. Yeah,
and if you want to genuinely discuss something in depth at length, with someone, and especially if they're having a debate where they want a couple different perspectives from different people, you need an hour, you need longer in some cases, and I don't buy that people don't have the attention span. I think it's just the way that traditional media is set up. They can't make things like you can on the internet, and they could, but they won't.
I agree with you. I find it difficult when I'm really locked into something interesting, like a really solid topic, to keep it under an hour is super difficult. There's so much to unwrap, isn't there?
The short form stuff, obviously that's fantastic for driving new viewers, especially the way the YouTube algorithm's been changing, but you still need the long stuff. It can't all be short form. Then what do you funneling people towards?
Yes.
Where you get in the great content, you need to sit down for an hour and eke out some pearls of wisdom.
Nice to meet you, Josh. Thanks for coming along.
You too.
Real pleasure.
Yeah.
And we'll do it again.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you.